This is your program, The Morning Show with Elton Jones, and a pleasant Friday to you. This is the weekend. I hope you have your plans in place. For me, it's the ball field. Okay, we're back here on Friday, and of course we have in the house Member of Parliament Sarah WESCOT Williams. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and good morning to all our listeners, and thank you for having me once again on this program.
Oh, we're going to be a little everywhere and there, and then we're going to end up back in the politics. But let's start with the defense used by the Rouge Renard casino operators and their relocation to the Super Plaza building. And the managing director said that he was assured, he didn't stay with me, he said government, that the library, one of the sensitive buildings we talk about, would not be there anymore. I don't remember a decision being taken by government or by anyone to move the library from its location, even though its damage is temporarily rehoused. Is there such a decision being taken or thought of?
Not that I know. I read with some surprise as well the response by the business, by the casino. And in addition to that discussion, so no, I know not of the definite plans for the library. That's one thing. But I believe that beyond that, the question, the criticism, whether we need a casino in that location overall should also be addressed. Of course, I've also seen the minister's response regarding why the license was issued for that location, and it was just a change. But given where we are today, before such a decision is taken, should we not take the opportunity to review the policy in general where it pertains to standalone casinos? I mean, right there in that vicinity, there are two others. So really, at the head of town, a third standalone casino catering to. That's the question we need to have answered. Catering to whom? Just to say that government will be getting will continue to get the casino fees from that particular casino. Sometimes, even as government, you have to forego the money, the income, based on a bigger policy, based on a bigger issue. And that issue is, do we need another standalone casino in that vicinity, in addition to the item that you raised regarding the library / schools, etc.
Talking about the response of the minister, I don't think I was too in line with that. First of all, that yeah, it's been done so all the time. There's many other places where it's done, which don't make sense to me. That's why you govern and you have to change things if it's not right.
I agree.
Secondly, that is going to provide 70 jobs. But what we're not taking account, the casinos are the largest abuser of the short-term contract. Besides that, standalone casinos are kept by the local population, not by your tourists, your millions of tourism.
Precisely. You see, so again, Elton, one argument about the jobs, and that's left to be seen in terms of exactly how many, in terms of who, etc., etc. That's left to be seen. And then secondly, again, put in the larger perspective of, as you mentioned, as I mentioned, who are we catering to? Really, is the market that attractive that a business sees, their survivability in such an area, and then to understand the reasons why. And again, from media reports, just like where you got them, I got them, to understand the reason for the move from the Front Street location to that location. It's a pity that the government has not taken opportunities like that to review a policy that has been there for many years. And yes, it was a good thing that we were able to curtail and put a policy in place back then, but just like when that was done, a particular number was established as the maximum. Certain conditions were put in place for you to have and operate a casino, and the question is whether those arguments, even for that amount established, whether those arguments are still valid today.
And Just one other question in relocation. We know that when there's construction of a new building that would make a difference in the area, we usually give the community a chance to file objections that it would look at. Is that not the case in relocation in this case of a casino?
Again, reading from the response by the business itself, apparently not many changes are going to take place to the building itself. So maybe that's a reason why it was not. I guess it was not put on any review for persons to be able to comment on it. But I think again some of the other arguments, in my opinion, even again sticking within the policy, because you establish, for example, a 50-meter radius. So 51 meters okay, so that would, what I'm saying? So that would prevent, so everybody would say, okay, if I go 51, then the reasons why we establish a radius will no longer be applicable. It's, I think we're kind of just, we're just, I wouldn't want to say fooling ourselves, but we are blinded to some of the realities.
Okay, I'm going to stick a while with the Minister of TIAT. The consumer platform, or the Consumer Coalition, came out against some proposals from Minister Johnson. He came with an idea that the civil servants, so he stuck basically with the civil servants should get a 13th week, and there should be indexing of their salaries, omitting all the other people that work in this country. I know it caused a little spat between him and a colleague minister, but it's not playing well outside of the Council of Ministers either.
Of course, because I mean, how that played out was again very, very unfortunate, and it is a trend that I am seeing developing, and I would encourage all, and this especially on the side of the government, this one or another one, to bring things back into perspective, to bring the governance of this country on an executive level back into perspective. That perspective is that the government is a collectivity. No, it's not the way it used to be when we were island territory, not that strong, but the government, so the Council of Ministers, is still a collectivity. They should not have to discuss proposals, whether these proposals merit consideration or not. In the media, I think it's unfortunate. I think it's confusing to the public, and it shouldn't be. I could imagine if we're looking at the issue of the civil service, for example, a very urgent matter under discussion relating to the financial situation of government is the reform of the pension system. The changes to that law or those laws are now with Parliament. I can imagine that if there is any fallout, if that reform goes through, if there is any fallout for civil servants, that the government would say, as a sort of a bridge, as a sort of, let's call it even an incentive to civil servants, let's consider doing this. So you have the whole pension reform, and yes, it's a change. It is definitely a revision of our pension system, in addition to the whole age matter, the increase of the age. So let's look if we can, maybe give the civil servants, especially those who will be affected in a certain manner. Let's see if there's something in that context. I can see a discussion taking place about how could we help the civil servants bridge a potential gap that they might encounter, but not in the ad hoc way that we have seen it played out in this particular matter. And I'm not even going in to the technicalities of the proposal. The government in the past, the government of St. Martin, has had created a way to allow the civil servants to receive their December month salary without taxes being deducted. Mind you, it was not that we did not calculate the taxes. What we did, we calculated the taxes over 11 months. So the full year taxes were calculated over 11 months. You pay it in 11 months, and then the last month you don't pay any taxes. That was done for several years, much to the satisfaction of the civil servants. But then even doing it like that, the tax directorate after a while was like, this is not the best thing what you guys are doing. And then we even created where the civil servants would save a little bit every month, and then in the 12th month they would get a payment. Saying all of this, Elton, to say the proposal not to tax a particular payment, vacation pay or not, is easier said than done. That's the point that I want to make. So we shouldn't even make it seem as if that's something that just with a stroke of a pen you can have achieved.
Well, it is easy to say.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
We have a terrible situation that is only getting worse. I read with much interest that NEPA, who I think is doing a good job, has signed a service level agreement with Argos to offer technical and expert support to the construction and masonry students. So basically apprentice thing that you get to learn on the job and then get a brand job. We have read that 97 students who have were successful were placed in jobs. But we have a dynamic in Samartan that nobody's dealing with. We have a group of young people who are not going to school, some who have never gone to school. They're the guys on the block. How trainable they are, I don't know, but I think something needs to be done with that group. That's our most problematic group of people, and those are the most delinquent people in our society. It's good that NEPA is doing a job, but we have to find a way, some kind of network to pick these people up and get them off the block.
I agree, and I know efforts have been made also in the past catering to that segment of our youth that would not easily just jump up and say, well, okay, maybe some of them, most of them, I guess, left school, no longer go to school, did not finish school, and unless some kind of, I don't want to say pressure, but unless some kind of extra effort is made in order to get them into a program, you are right. We will only see the growth of this phenomenon. In addition to that, Elton, what we also should be looking at is persons coming into St. Martin, also young persons, and who are basically taking on that kind of I can't even call it a livelihood, but I mean, just being out there and not being taken up neither in the in some type of educational program or in the job market for obvious reasons. And you also, in my opinion, are seeing more and more of this. Again, several programs have been initiated in the past to deal with exactly those persons. You would remember the social formation program was one of basically allowing young persons, school dropouts, to follow an education, vocational, technical education, and in fact, give them a stipend, for them to go into school. Many of these young persons, men and women, have children, have young children, and so that program, the social formation program of a couple of years ago, was to provide them with a stipend, to provide them with transportation even. So those type of incentives, we remember the Get Off the Block, Get on the Bus initiative of former Minister of Education, Dr. Rhoda Arundel, so several projects have been initiated with that goal in mind, but none of them have actually been a long-term program that year after year is available as we attempt to bring these persons in.
If I understand compulsory education well, is people supposed to be in school up to 18 years? Am I right? Under 18 or 16?
18, yes.
So if people drop out of school or put out of school before 18, what kind of force enforcement, we have to make them comply with the law.
You know, there is the enforcement of the compulsory education, but I see it less on the higher level than it is on the lower levels in education. I'm not talking about the educational background of the person. I'm talking the school levels, you know.
Okay.
But yes, it applies. It applies. And once you're under the age of compulsory education, you should be in school.
And the other thing that is affecting this policy or this law is we go back to our old favorite, border control. Like you said,
Yeah.
anybody just come in. Some people come from countries, and sad to say, but education is not a big thing on their agenda. They come here and they have to go in school, and it's like it's a whole new thing to them, and they don't fit in. So we're not attacking this thing on the wrong end. We should, at least by my thinking, deal with our border control issues first before, because people are going to keep coming in. I mean, and it's not that difficult to get in right now.
Elton, for years, I have battled with this issue when in the executive branch, and I'm talking going back before 10 when I had the responsibility for a couple of years for education. That's when compulsory education was introduced. And finally, after having that discussion, it was introduced in phases, you know, in years. But before that, the discussion about do you do something about border control before you implement compulsory education. And from an educational perspective, it was no, you know, once the person is here, he or she is entitled to education. But we did open the floodgates, and we saw the results in our schools. We saw the results that our teachers were facing. So, and again, now to me, you have a great part again of young persons living on St. Martin, having come to St. Martin by different means, and basically are not in school. And if they have passed compulsory education age, then they are out there and doing little jobs, and you ask yourself, how are these persons expected to sustain themselves in the long run?
We go back to one of your nice issues, Financial Action Task Force.
Yes.
we have adjusted the penal code as required.
Right.
And one of the questions left by Member of Parliament Sarah Westcott Williams is, the government says they're going to come with a note of aanwijziging. What is this note of aanwijziging when there was no new law implemented? What wijziging?
Well, actually, the matter of, we have dealt with our civil code and the changes to our civil code as far as these changes regard anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism measures and the so-called CFATF recommendations. So we've dealt with our civil code, we've dealt with our criminal code. Still outstanding is the criminal procedure code, and we have had many debates on that. As I mentioned on several occasions, the intention of the government behind the criminal procedure code was to use the opportunity. No, in fact, they have been working on a revision of the criminal procedure code, the entire law. And they have used that revision to also include the CFATF measures. But now what the Parliament has had in front of it in terms of the criminal procedure code is the whole revised criminal procedure code with all of the different aspects that were added into this criminal procedure code. And that's where the discussion in Parliament basically got stuck and still is stuck. And we have heard about amendments being proposed. I myself have proposed an amendment to this law, but my amendment is actually to allow the government to implement the different parts of this criminal procedure code at different times. So right now, the criminal procedure code even when passed by Parliament, you need another national ordinance for its implementation. That's what it says. So the the Criminal Procedure Code would go into effect, should go into effect by national ordinance. That means another ordinance has to come to Parliament to say, okay, we have our Criminal Procedure Code, now when does it go into effect? And I am proposing that that be changed to allow the government to decide, for example, the articles regarding the CFATF recommendations, they go into effect, let's say the 1st of January 2020, if we could get it done so fast. Other articles that are more incisive matters regarding the criminal procedure, you put those off until you have had a discussion. A big item of discussion was, as you know, the matter of the Crown witness, which is now included in the Criminal Procedure Code. And as I have also explained, fact is that a Crown witness can currently be named. So the issue of the Crown witness right now is applicable. The proposal that is in the Criminal Procedure Code is that we now put it in our code. And the question is, the debate is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Should we contextualize it in our law, or should we just leave it up to those who make use of a Crown witness to decide, well, this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to do it based on jurisprudence. You see what I'm saying? And so that's the question in that particular instance of a Crown witness.
Okay, talking about jurisprudence, if I understand it well, our penal code or penal laws are basically taken from the Netherlands Antilles, from Curaçao. St. Martin is now being threatened so by making a certain date to implement things, or you can be blacklisted. You stand the risk of being blacklisted. But Curaçao has no such things, and they're not meeting these amendments or recommendations of the FATF. So why is it specifically St. Martin?
You know, all countries all countries that are member need to make sure that the recommendations are put into policy, are put in especially laws, etc., etc. All. How you do that is another issue. And when you do it, is that considered sufficient? What am I saying, ELTON? If you have a recommendation saying that all financial institutions must at all time know their client, know where their client get their financial sources from, etc., etc., know the identity, etc., etc. So if that is a recommendation, where should a country make sure that this recommendation is established to be lived up to? Many of the things that are recommended by the CFATF, the government of St. Martin has put in different laws. We have had in the past, because again I want to repeat, ELTON, these three codes that we have been dealing with most recently: Civil Code, Criminal Code, and Criminal Procedure Code, are not the only laws that we changed in order to meet the CFATF recommendations. In fact, when we were at the point of coming to those codes, there were only about maybe 8 to 10 recommendations left from the 40 to put into codes. So we had a law on the MOT, we had a law on cross-border transactions, etc., etc. So many of the recommendations have already been put in our laws. Then let's take specifically our Civil Code. So there is this recommendation that the matter of shares to bearer, so you could have a share in a company and it does not have to be on your name. If you, ELTON, have that share, it's your own. If I have one, it's my own. But in the context of anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing measures, it is recommended that this no longer be the case. So you can't have a company that would consist, for example, of X amount of shares that are shares to bearer, which means whoever have the shares basically have part ownership in that company. In order to deal with that particular recommendation, the government of St. Martin changed our civil code. You see, so how you do it, but you got to make is a question, and not a question, it's a decision you have to take, and then it need to be felt that you have sufficiently addressed the recommendation, whether in your civil code, in your other law, and you know, so in your supervision law of the central bank, all of those things.
We tried in the amendment of this law to prevent the Chamber of Commerce and Industry from throwing people out without having some sort of due process. But we allow the banks to be proactive, and ahead of any law, the banks has already started, in the case of the gaming houses and so, refusing business or closing whatever business they had with them. How can one institution, mean an essential institution to the economy, just decide to do it without a law backing it?
Yeah, because you see what happened. So we have the general laws, and for example, that basically establish that financial institutions must feel comfortable with their clients, and that there is no risk of any integrity breach to their system. How the banks decide that's basically up to the banks, you know. And if the banks feel that there is a certain risk, then they have to take the necessary measures. Tied into that, however, is the question: what can be done legally for those businesses that might have a license from government, that have been operating for X amount of years, and could possibly end up not having anywhere to bank their money, their business income, etc., business transactions, etc., etc. So that is now what needs to be looked at. You have, for example, countries that have measures that basically would say that everybody is entitled to have a bank account. Is this something that St. Martin can look at, and is there the need to establish such? But again, there is a certain discretion, a large amount of discretion that financial institutions have in terms of protecting their financial integrity as a business, as a bank, as a financial institution.
As a government, we have decided to tackle the illegal the mushrooming of illegal booths. And we're for the moratorium. Nobody's allowed to rent or build or whatever. And it stays where it is, but we don't do anything about the illegal booths. We just have them pay a fee. Is that the way you go about illegality?
Another such issue. This matter, in my opinion, as I need to say, as a St. Martin, because otherwise, if I don't mention that, then they're going to say, oh yeah, she's talking politics or whatever have you. So as a St. Martin, do we really think the way that this has been happening is the right way? On one corner, 2, 3 of them. You know what I'm saying? And then the argument, and then I think that they were probably somehow aware of the ministry's decision to kind of bring them into perspective, bring them into scope. And because you saw them mushrooming all about the place, and then the government says, from what I've read again, the government says, well, you know, we, if you have a branch or branches, apparently these little things are considered branches, then come in and register so that we collect. But again, there is a bigger picture to that. I mean, how big is our market? How big is our market as a country for this type of, if you want to call it, service or business? And so now those who, I guess, quickly, because I saw some of them went up nearly overnight, were they aware that once you're there, that all you're going to have to do is register and then pay your fee? And really, is it everything now we're only going to look at what the income would mean for government, or are there, which I believe there should be, other considerations that we should look at?
Yeah, but I have a problem with how we enforce law. Look, somebody builds an illegal building, the law should be, or used to be, take it down. I mean, if you start building an extra boarding house for people in your backyard, and Vladimir gets out, they come and make you take it down. You don't have a permit. And now we have people that are working outside the law, but we justify it as long as they can pay a fee for having it there.
Yeah.
That's
It's wrong. That should not be our that should not be our only consideration. We need to decide what we want. What do we want as government? What do we want an income from? And I mean, so if you could get 10. If 10 of these booths could go up, because you could get 12,000 something guilders a month, so then 10 could go up, 20 could go up, because that means with no end in sight, because they will be paying you. That cannot be the consideration. That cannot be the foremost consideration. Should not be.
With elections on the go again, I'm coming back to something that I told you a long time ago and I believe to be true. I talked yesterday with the Deputy Minister of Plenipotentiary, and it came to me that it's the only ministry of the 8 that has a deputy. You remember we talk about having junior ministers?
Yeah.
Why is it we find it necessary to put a deputy for the Minister of Plenipotentiary while the other ministries on the island are overloaded, in my humble opinion? Because if you take Tiet, for instance, he spends a lot of time in tourism. That's the way it should be. You have to travel to get business, to attract business. But the other parts of the ministry are left behind. There's nobody taking those up. So why is it we can't do the same in the others?
Yeah, Elton, the Deputy Minister Plenipotentiaryship is actually a political decision. A political decision going back to the Netherlands Antilles time. In fact, you would recall there were times when, as Netherlands Antilles, you had 2 Deputy Minister Plenipotentiary, and then the party or parties from the Windward Islands would get a deputy. That's and so that was taken over. Now we have made it part of our legislation, giving the Deputy Minister Plenipotentiary the same rights as the Minister Plenipotentiary. What we have not been totally successful at yet is making sure that these 2 functionaries really get, have something to do in their capacity, because they're considered full-time. Normally a deputy would be to replace, and and over the years I know that several ministers plenipotentiary have sought to create that job, that function that would give his or her deputy, the full-time work that is that basically is thought of from a Deputy Minister Plenipotentiary. But it is something that actually grew, and now we need to give it content. And we have been successful, a little successful over the years, in terms of also giving the position of the Deputy Minister Plenipotentiary some more content than just to be there when the Minister Plenipotentiary can't, for example, attend. And this should be placed in the context of looking at the role and responsibilities of the Cabinet of the Minister Plenipotentiary in The Hague, which, as you know, the one of the prime responsibilities is to be part of the Kingdom Council of Ministers meetings. But I must say that, especially now, we have seen where so much more can be done by a cabinet of the country in the Netherlands, in The Hague, in the area of social activities, in the area of keeping a network of St. Martiners in the Netherlands, in the area of encouraging professional St. Martiners in the Netherlands, to make sure, maintain that link with their country. So those type of activities have now been added to the responsibilities and the roles of the Minister and Deputy Minister Plenipotentiary.
Mr. Somersault said one part of their duties is to deal with the students going to that, and to, importantly, try to encourage those who have finished studying to come back home to contribute. But they're having a problem with the package. The questions are, what do you come back to? You come back home, you have to go live with mommy and daddy. There is nowhere in St. Martin anything set up for returning students. We're kind of elated when we wish them goodbye at the airport.
Yeah.
But on the coming back, there's nothing there. It's sad that we're in the construction phase of a country. I mean, really, in the construction, we're building a nation, and we can't get our own people to come back and contribute.
And, you know, and that should be, and that should and can be part of a plan. But the plan needs to include more than, fine, we want our young people, our studied young persons to come back. We need to look at how we would like to see this happen, Elton. I always say, and I said this from going back in the days, we send out anywhere approximately, let's take a 300 mark.
Yep.
After 4 or even 6 years of, let's say, that same 300 finishing, there's no way that we can accommodate all of them at that time in all of the areas that they have studied. So you would want to give some flexibility, and at the same time ensuring that in the areas where you need those kind of disciplines, because remember, these persons go out to study on the basis of recommendations of the field of studies that they should pursue, which mean that as a government you have looked at what will we be needing and needing more in X amount of years. And then in order to stimulate that return of your resources, then you got to make sure, well, okay, what could be a hindrance? Housing, years ago, what was established, because what was an issue years ago for our students coming back and having to pay off their loan, because the whole study financing, the Dutch study financing has changed over the years, and a big issue for our students was coming back home and paying off their study debt, the part that was a debt. What I did at that time, Elton, I created the package allowing our students, if you came back and you worked for a maximum of 5 years, your debt would be reduced with 10% every year. At the time, you know, it was like, oh, you know, that something like that should have been across the board, not only for those coming back working for government. But so that was one issue. It was a big issue. Now you have the issue, these persons coming back. How can we accommodate them, especially where housing is concerned? So that part should also be of whatever plan that we're looking at bringing our human capital back to St. Martin to fulfill the jobs and positions. I don't have a problem per se if our young people following their studies decide, you know, we're going to spend a year or 2 years, we're going to work out in the exterior, but with the goal to continuously look at where are my services needed and on St. Martin, so that eventually I can return and contribute.
One of the things we need to question with our education system, how we spend our education dollar, is study advice. There was a time, I remember, when I went to school, everybody became a welder, because that was a going thing in Curacao. Curacao had the dock mascapé, and they needed a lot of kids went from St. Martin and did welding too, but when they come back, they never weld a day in their life. So we spend money there, they study in their choice. We should be able to get our little dollar, we don't have that much, at the things we need. The administration, government administration, lead a lot of professionals. We don't have nobody coming back to do that. We need lawyers. We need economists. We don't have nobody doing that. So
not many. We have, but not many. And you know, Elton, and you are so right. But what we have also seen is that over the years, a more direct selection of study areas has taken place. That's for sure, because formerly, really, I know years gone back, you could have gotten a scholarship to study, and we saw a lot of persons take up that cosmetology.
Yeah.
You know, like really, you could get a scholarship to go and do that. But now again, because of the finances, not everybody can go study anything that they would like to. But I also want to add, Elton, as we look at that, you know, and kind of more direct choices for our scholarship recipients, we also need to make sure that as much as possible, those persons who do not get an opportunity to go abroad, that we have educational possibilities here locally for them, and even in the region, which is part of the policy right now, but here locally. And in that context, we need to continue to look at the University of St. Martin and what role they can play in allowing as many young persons as possible coming out of secondary education to go on to a tertiary level. We also need to take that into consideration, because not every student coming out of high school, for more than one reason, will have the opportunity to go abroad and finish his or her studies. So the opportunities here locally as well need to be expanded. And of course, our university and what they have been doing, you have NEPA, as you mentioned, which is also very good in terms of offering possibility following secondary education, but we should never lose that, the continued your education here on St. Martin possibility out of sight.
Okay, let's go to our election. Very nice. Okay, first question is, we did something last time that I didn't like. I talked about it because I believe there are certain things that are cultural to certain countries. It's something we have done for so many years, and for reasons not clear to me yet, we have decided to bring in observers. To what end? What was the intention of the observer? What was going wrong that we identified that we needed observers to put it straight?
You know, sometimes you don't want to be the person or the country sticking out. And I think in this case, because it was the popular thing, you know, and the popular thing, yeah, you know, countries with elections in these times and days, you need observers. But this observers question is not the first time it came up on St. Martin. In fact, over the years and many years ago, you know, the question was raised, the proposal came for observers. So I think it's more something like, okay, fine, you know, that's a issue, that's a topic. Why can't St. Martin have observers? So you would have persons on one side of the fence who saying, yeah, it's good, you know, at least you can ensure fair elections, and others are saying, like you are asking, is it necessary, or is it just, you know, something we think we should go along with because it's very much in the, you know, it's very much in at the moment.
I've spoken to one of these observers after last year from the Caribbean region. They thought, we do politics different than everybody. They learn from us. There's nobody here knocking down somebody in a white shirt or red shirt and stuff like that. It seems to be a party affair. Everybody, you get a little bit of teasing, that's normal, but there's no real conflict in the parties. Oh, we're different, but we live like that.
But you know, and I think one of the role of observers, electoral observers, is especially at the end of the day, can you say that the process was fair? You know, that you free and fair, and that you have no issue in terms of the votes weren't counted good, or the close, or those kind of things. But whether you could determine that just by having some observers go from poll to poll is another question, you know. But again, it's more like, you know, it's kind of an in topic. So why not St. Martin?
Another thing, when we had the last election, so last year, 2018, we had set the 4-year term to 2022. Yeah. After this snap election, would the date go up to 2024? Would the next election go to, or we stick to the 2022?
No. Every time you have an election, you start with a goodwill, exactly, for the 4-year term of Parliament as prescribed by our Constitution. And you know, over the last couple of, I can't even say weeks, because it has been something that has had my attention when I was on an executive branch in Parliament. I think we need to find a way to stand still for a moment and, decide how can we ensure some type of stability. Right now, Elton, I hope that the next interim government or the interim government basically gets in as soon as possible, for the simple reason that right now it mightn't seem so, but there's a serious stalemate in the country. You have a caretaker government, minimum caretaker government. One of the ministers in that minimum caretaker government is supported by the current coalition, and so it's we are at an impasse in terms of governance. Nothing can really happen. And then the developments over the last week from within the new coalition of 9 makes you wonder. And this thing is not only going to go on until election, it's going to go on until you have had your election, you have a new parliament, and on the basis of that parliament, a government is formed. But the dynamics in our governance right now are very, very peculiar. Very, very peculiar.
From what we get from the Electoral Council and what we read, there are 8 parties to contest the upcoming election. 1, the Party for Progress has not been decided on yet, and SAM has in the meanwhile withdrawn. So 8 are left. It would mean that we have about 200 or more candidates running for election. It means that we have 10 candidates per seat in Parliament. What are the campaign issues?
And that's one of the reasons why I chose to continue on the banner of the United Democrats, because that banner, that manifesto was and is clear. The focus on the rebuilding of St. Martin was spelled out in that manifesto. Unfortunately, this has not been completed by a long shot. It has not been completed. And I think in terms of the issues, basically are still the same issues. And as far as I'm concerned, I think picking these up and getting a committed government to execute these, because what you have seen, and that's why we're at elections right now, is that commitment, that joint vision which was professed, especially by the United Democrats, it did not stay that way. It did not stay that way. The persons committed no longer were committed. But again, the issues, in my opinion, are the same. Going out there and saying, we're going to change the government, we're going to change the parliament, of course, to each his own. But that is not a realistic pitch to the people in this election.
I don't know if it's realistic. I know it doesn't make sense. One of the things is this, Sarah. We still have people. The ombudsman just did a walkthrough. People still having problem with their roof, having problem with this and all. People are really suffering in this country. Whatever you want to call it, just fooling the people that we could fix Parliament, we could fix this. People want to know, how do I put food on the table tomorrow?
Exactly. And then so of course the ombudsman was in Parliament, made this presentation, and while the focus was of the presentation, and that's the way that it was made, was on to show, look at these persons and their home situation. But what was quite important, the matter of basically a social crisis which goes beyond the matter of home and roof repairs.
Yep.
And we need to look at that. We honestly need to look at that. Secondly, following that, and I regret that this was not better coordinated. So I don't know if it was planned before or it was a result of the presentation by the Ombudsman. But then we saw the National Reconstruction Program Bureau, we saw they having a session with persons apparently who are still out there waiting to get some definite response regarding assistance in connection with their home repairs. More than 100 persons, if I recall well, it was 160 or something like that. You know, so, and my thing is, which I have again asked that the National Recovery Program Bureau comes to Parliament. Fine, you had a session and the persons who you invited, I hope they were persons you took from a list that you have, they could have asked whatever questions. Further than the questions, these persons, are they all entitled to assistance? And if so, when can they have this assistance? That's what I would like to know. You know, so we saw the presentation, then we saw from media reports that the Bureau had that session, and apparently a lot of persons was there, and it seemed to have provided quite some information. But what now? We cannot have had that session, and 6 months down the line, you know, the persons are then asking, okay, what did you do with the information? Just last night, I was speaking to a lady who was also invited for that session, and she said to me, I did not go to the session. Reason being that they have come to my home. They have done so-called a technical assessment. Others have come, so-called a technical assessment, have not heard anything for months. So what question could I have but to ask, am I going to be helped, and when will I be helped?
The Ombudsman complained or lamented the fact that you can't get reaction from government. They don't answer you back. And if they're not, in my mind at least, if they're not answering the Ombudsman, they're not going to answer ELTON either. But her concerns were legitimate, and the Ombudsman's job is not to drive around and ask people what they're going through. But if you don't get answers from government, you have to find a way to, you know, justify what the people say.
True. Mm-hmm.
Because she said, look, people are lamenting the speed. How the haze. After 2 years, people should have had it. But not only that, government is now saying, or have been saying for a while, people have to qualify, but nobody knows how you qualify. What do you have to do to qualify?
And ELTON, and that's why I refer to this session that apparently was held with over 100 persons. But having those general sessions, but was, for example, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, were they told your application that is in, although we send technical persons to assess your situation, that you can be helped? Have persons been told this? Are persons still sitting, waiting, and hoping that government will assist them because they know they had put in their name? That is what needs to be clarified. And again, I would like to hear this from the National Reconstruction Program Bureau of Mr. Connor, you know, so that in that information is what persons need. Did they get it out of this session? I don't know, because I can't see in such a session that every individual and their individual questions could have been answered. But people need to understand and know, are all of those persons, as you mentioned, do all of those persons still qualified, or are they still to see where you're going to say, well, this amount of persons qualify and the others not? Because then people should know that. And it is much too late to, to basically be giving those answers.
But I don't understand why it's so difficult. Government, we have a ton of radio stations, two TV stations, and we have the internet. Government uses it pretty well. Why is it so difficult to get information to the people on what the requirements are to qualify or how you don't qualify? I'm being told, yeah, if you're renting, no, we can't have, and if you're on leased land. But I don't have a problem with that. If that is the policy, it's the policy, but people should know.
That's my point.
You can't have people going up
and waiting and not having received a final answer. And that seems to be a problem for many persons. You put down your name, they send to have your house checked, but maybe or maybe not, there are some other issues that basically disqualify you. Persons should know whether that is the case or not.
I looked at the tape from the Ombudsman, and I saw these people working for the NRPB, I think they're in a kind of social, I consider them as social workers from what they were saying. That's what I got from it. Their job was to vet all the people that need help, people in type. But don't we have social workers here that we have to import them out? We don't have local social workers coming back? Because these people, maybe they want to help, they have the best of intention, but they don't understand the people here. The ombudsman referred to jollification and some other thing, jollification, and but the thing is, most of these people who have not lived in our culture don't understand what jollification is.
True.
To the average person coming from overseas, a guy live in a house worth 350,000, and they get the impression he built it 2 months ago. Maybe it took him 15 years to get there. They don't understand it, so they feel somebody have a house for value at that should be able to pay. They don't need help. So you need people, you need input from people who understand how people in St. Martin function, how things happen here, and that to determine, because if a guy have a large home, he say he don't have money, to a guy outside, no, that's not true. But he really doesn't have the money.
I didn't see the social workers part that you are mentioning. What I did see, the persons with the program that actually started out as a shelter program, and that has become a sort of a transition housing. So the Dr. J Foundation, where we saw Dr. Arundel and some of the persons who work with her on that particular initiative. And from that initiative, it is clear how many persons are actually in need of that kind of accommodation. But further than the accommodation is also the guidance for these persons in terms of getting them into a job that they can sustain themselves, because being put up in a facility such as that for a temporary period of time is not, you got to then do the other step, and how do you assist these persons? So I think from that perspective, the reference in the ombudsman's presentation of a social crisis is looking like, beyond the home repair. What do you do, for example, with persons such as those in terms, how do you prepare them to get back into society and sustain themselves?
And a question I've asked you before, in December of 2017, the then government of St. Martin, went to Parliament for an amendment to the budget to set aside $3 million to assist people with roof repair and home repairs and so. We never heard what happened to that money. There was amendment made, but according to the civil service, government are not fixing any homes. A lady in this film from the ombudsman said she got material, but she don't have the money to pay nobody to put it on.
I remember that discussion regarding a budget amendment and government having that program, but I don't think that ever went through, Elton. Neither the budget, nor the program. Not the program for the government. Indeed, you remember, because it became a whole issue then, and government ordering the material through whom, and I think because of that went nowhere. That went nowhere. So that big order of material that then government would have distributed, that went nowhere.
One of the reasons, though, and you could remember this well, just as well, or maybe better than I do, one of the reasons we were considered corrupt is that we used their way at a time, so what is part of Romi now, to help people in these situations. If we have material that we could give people to help them, they can't put a roof on, we would send their way and help these people. Today, we know what is being charged out there in the construction. Somebody on pension just simply can't afford to hire somebody to put on a roof. Why can't we use the public works to help people?
Yeah, and you're right, Elton. Over the years, that task or possible task for the Ministry of Romi was completely eliminated. Completely eliminated. So you don't even have a crew there at Public Works that you could say, well, okay, this crew we can send out to go assist. And again, the biggest problem I have understood from the onset regarding assisting persons with their homes and repairs and whatever have you was the technical assessment. So to go and look at the house and say, well, you know, this particular house, we got to replace the rafters and do whatever, that was the biggest problem. Getting sufficient manpower to do that. That was the biggest issue. The social intake, so to see whether the persons were indeed in need, what were the living conditions, that was completed long before we could have gotten to the technical assessment of the different homes that need to be repaired. Because what happened, now you can't take anything for granted. You can't say, you can't take the person's word and by them saying, well, you know, I have a little knowledge as a let's say a senior. Yeah. I have a little knowledge about house and building, homes and building, and I can tell you this is what I need. No, not according to procedures today. You know, we got to get somebody to come in and assess your house, and if you can't get a person to assess it, technically speaking, then you have to wait. And again, from my understanding, that has been one of the major issues.
Yeah, but it's defeating the purpose because we're not really helping our people. I could understand people's frustration after 2 years. And,
yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It's horrible. And just to remind you of something I asked you last time about Knops and his 1,000 homes. It's not close to 1,000, even when I count the NGOs. Mm-hmm. It's not close to 1,000. Do I say he's lying or he just misspoke?
I you know, and numbers is a remarkable thing, huh? And I'm sure his reaction would be, but in fact, even some of his own civil servants had told him, you know, you have not used that number correctly, and but surely we have not had 1,000 homes fixed/repaired yet. That's a fact.
The other question I had to ask you today, this was by a friend of mine asked me, we put a moratorium on casinos. And this person thinks that how can you put a moratorium on a business, on any line of businesses, man, that the locals are not into? So it denies the locals a chance of getting into that. Mm-hmm. So when you put a moratorium, if a local applies, what happens then?
Well, you know, and again, and this goes back to a deeper issue. Should we separate our policies and affirmative action according to you know, in other words, should we reserve part of the market specifically if it's a local endeavor? That question we need to ask ourselves. And if so, then you got to make sure that you put regulations in order, who and how. You know what I'm saying? Because we've also seen the terminology of local can be used loosely. Because if that person then does it for somebody else, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we have a lot of people fronting.
That's
one of the things that people refer to is, if you look, we had it in '95, but we had it more so after Irma. After the storm, you go to the airport and everybody who was in control of anything is heading out. Mm-hmm. So we're left with not much. So should we not encourage more local people to be part of this economy so that everything will run when there's emergency? That's from that perspective.
And that's why, Elton, I believe that since we have reserved money for the small and medium enterprise on St. Martin, we should be very keen on how we apply that. What do we stimulate? Who do we stimulate? Because as you know, that type of business is the backbone of any economy. And again, I can't wait to see, and I've asked it over and over again, how are we, what is our vision in applying assistance to the small and medium enterprise sector on St. Martin? That answer has not yet been forthcoming, but that is also money that has been earmarked for that specific purpose.
So we have a few days of postulation. Of course, Sarah's coming back with UD.
Yes.
So tell me, what do you see the campaign looking like? How does the election look?
You know, I wish there was some way that we could have a government in there, and at this point in time, I am not being selective. There's so many things that need immediate attention in this country. And unfortunately, the campaign, the election is only is going to get in the way of things that need to be done, and persons are not going to be hearing a straight story because it is election, it is campaign. I know it might be wishful thinking, but that's why I mentioned earlier that we are in a peculiar situation where our governance is concerned, and I hope to be able to present, a clear vision, a clear path going forward. But it's going to be difficult to get the necessary support on board for the things that matter right now to the people of St. Martin. The airport being one of them that is caught up in the
Are
fire.
you convinced that we are condemned to coalitions, or we will never see an outright majority in St. Martin again?
I wouldn't say that we're condemned to coalition, but clearly, ELTON, and this is such an old record, but we need to do something about our electoral system, because clearly an electoral reform is what we have spoken about over and over. We cannot continue like this, regardless to what side of the fence you're on at what time. We can't continue like this. I think you jokingly remarked earlier, I mean, it nearly seems as if we're going to end up at some point with 7 ministers with their own program and outlook, and 15 members of parliament, with their individual take on matters. You can't govern like that. You cannot govern like that. And if that's the direction that we're going to end up in anyway, then let's adjust our system to accommodate that. But right now, the way we're going, no, because every year you make one step forward and then you're 2 steps backward in less than no time.
Okay, in closing, this is what I want to ask. With the election already started, I mean, you don't have to wait for postulation.
Exactly.
It's already started. Do you really expect us to get anything done between now and December?
That's my fear, and in fact it goes beyond December, because realize you're gonna have the election, and then you're gonna have
Formation.
Parliament sitting in February. You're gonna have a formation, and there's so many issues that need to be dealt with and finalized right now. That's exactly my preoccupation. The coming months are critical to St. Martin in terms of some decisions that need to be taken, and I don't see clear decisions being taken under the current circumstances.
All right. We've been speaking with Member of Parliament Sarah Westcott Williams, the leader of the UD in the upcoming election. We want to wish all the parties. Well, we're going to have Sarah on a lot of times before postulation, of course. Now, postulation's a long way away. So, but anyway, we want to thank you for coming and hope to see you.
It was a pleasure, as usual.
Have a good day. Radio listeners, TV viewers, we thank you for listening in. Do join us on Monday, God's willing. Have a pleasant day further. Goodbye.